Tonight, the appeal for votes and a transformed election dynamic.
We will win. And we will win.
Kamala Harris takes center stage as the Democrats look to crown their candidate.
Frankly, it'll be like a rock concert. I think people are going to be cheering and pretty excited.
The party hoping the conference will keep the momentum going. Canadian politicians push for more supports.
It's clear the status quo is not working.
From homelessness to aging infrastructure, a cry for help from desperate cities. Protests spread over the rape and murder of an Indian doctor.
As a citizen of India, I am protesting against this heinous crime.
The demands for a stronger stance on violence against women. Plus, remembering a pivotal moment in pop culture history.
It's a form of uniting everybody at the end. We're all one.
Woodstock in pictures and the man behind the lens.
CTV National News with Heather Butts.
Good evening. There's been a dramatic shift in the race for the White House. New polling puts Vice President Kamala Harris ahead of Donald Trump on the eve of the biggest moment of her political career so far. The Democratic National Convention set to kick off in just hours with a symbolic handoff from President Joe Biden. CTV's Kamal Karamali reports.
The signs, the lights, even the balloons precisely placed the night before a historic Democratic National Convention in Chicago.
Frankly, it'll be like a rock concert. I think people are going to be cheering and pretty excited.
President Joe Biden will officially pass the torch to Kamala Harris for the nomination in a keynote speech tomorrow night in front of nearly 5,000 delegates.
And I think he's going to use that time to highlight the accomplishments of the Biden-Harris administration.
Vice President Harris and her running mate, Tim Walz, will formally accept the party's nominations.
We'll get speeches from their spouses, and those are oftentimes very important at giving you a biography of those particular candidates.
Delegates will also sign off on the party's platform, which includes raising the minimum wage, focusing on affordable child and health care, taxing billionaires and corporations, banning assault weapons, and increasing abortion protections. Former presidents Barack Obama and Bill Clinton expected to appear midweek, while Harris will close out the final night of the convention on Thursday. Today, Harris and Walz made a campaign stop in the critical battleground state of Pennsylvania with a promise.
And we will win.
Heading to the convention riding a whirlwind of momentum. A new poll from Washington Post and ABC News giving her a 4-point lead over Donald Trump.
That is significant because you usually, as a candidate, get a bump in the polls after your convention.
Trump preparing for one of his busiest weeks yet.
I look forward to debating her, by the way. Her policies are so bad.
Fresh off a rally in Pennsylvania, the Republican nominee is set to be planning to barnstorm several key states. Meanwhile, the Democratic convention will also be a backdrop for mass protests. Organizers expecting tens of thousands of people to rally against the war in Gaza.
They want to have their voices heard. They're going to be heard, no doubt about it, and we're going to protect that.
And for the first time ever, social media influencers will be part of the mix, live streaming the entire event on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Heather.
All right, Kamal, thanks. On this side of the border, it's not a fight for votes, but a fight for help that has several politicians together for the next 3 days. Mayors from across Ontario are pushing upper levels of government for help to address homelessness and aging infrastructure. Just two issues they say have reached crisis levels in communities large and small. CTV's Colton Prale has more.
The status quo is not working.
The message couldn't be more clear. Ontario municipalities say they can't solve the homelessness crisis, and the province needs to do more.
We subsidize the province by about $4 billion a year, collectively. So I think we're doing our part, but we need the government to help us. And it can't simply be yet another funding announcement.
A new provincial ministry, action plan, and continuous funding are just some of the asks. Researchers say the issue has ballooned across the country as encampments spring up from Halifax to Edmonton, costing provinces and cities hundreds of millions of dollars.
What are the wait lists for social housing? What are the wait lists for affordable or supportive housing? And we see tens of thousands of people on those wait lists.
It comes as municipal purse strings are being pulled in all directions. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities warning city infrastructure across the country is in dire condition. Already, water main breaks in Calgary and Montreal have cost tens of millions of dollars, while climate change-fueled storms bring floods and fires, leaving repair bills in the billions with costs more than doubling every decade.
To break that unacceptable trend, we need the federal, provincial, and municipal governments to work together with private industry, with homeowners, so that we make the investments.
Meanwhile, a new report suggests public transit across the country faces a death spiral of service cuts and falling ridership as cities struggle under massive deficits.
Montreal's already in death spiral. Ottawa is walking into one, and Vancouver is telling us if we don't fix this model, they will be in one very soon as well.
A federal organization of Canadian mayors says cities need new taxation powers and billions more from Ottawa and the provinces to be sustainable moving forward. Heather.
Colton, thanks. The impact of severe weather has one mayor in Quebec vowing to go to court to defend his community's response. CTV's Maria Saru on a costly cleanup from the remnants of Tropical Storm Debbie.
Anique Van de Veen's walk home on Ile Bizarre looks very different today than it did 1 week ago. She's been picking up the pieces after the remnants of Tropical Storm Debbie flooded her basement with more than 2,000 millimeters of water.
It was like a tornado went through. When we walked downstairs, like the water tank was falling. Even when we walked into our laundry room, my washing machine flipped upside down. Seafood!
Van de Veen's friends and family have been working 12-hour days to strip the lower level down to the cement. Adding to the stress, she says her insurance won't cover the up to $70,000 in damages because the flooding was caused by overflow from a nearby marsh rather than the sewer system.
Our TV, computer, we had a wood-burning stove. This was my full sewing room. Washer, dryer, bathroom.
Van de Veen has submitted a claim to Quebec's Ministry of Public Security, which is helping compensate homes affected by the storm, but she expects to pay out of pocket for part of the costs. The mayor of the borough, Doug Hurley, admitted he's now facing a 4 to 6 figure fine from the province for dumping water into the Rivière des Prairies before Environment Quebec approved the move.
I'm prepared to go to court and argue the particular point. It is important that when situations occur that we have our priorities in place. The first one is human lives and safety. After that, we'll worry about the details later.
He added there were lessons learned this time around, and he's working to put new protocols in place as similar situations become more likely due to climate change.
One is our emergency response. Trying to get hold of a lot of different people over the weekend can be difficult.
As for Van de Veen, she says it'll be at least 2 to 3 years before she has a functional basement again, but she's grateful her family is safe. Maria Saru, CTV News, Montreal.
A tornado that tore through a small southern Ontario town has been classified as an EF1.
You know, there was some pretty impressive damage. Things like rail cars being blown over and trees that were basically scattered every which way, including against the direction of the tornado, which is not typically common for a weak tornado. Flipped trailers and including tractor trailers.
The twister brought winds upwards of 165 kilometers an hour to the community of Ayr, damaging homes and businesses. Meanwhile, Ernesto is a hurricane again. The tropical storm grew stronger today as it moves north in the Atlantic, setting off warnings about dangerous riptides at beaches on the U.S. East Coast. The Canadian Hurricane Center is warning of moderate winds, rain, and large waves in southeastern Newfoundland when Ernesto passes by late Monday or early Tuesday. The wildfire that destroyed parts of Jasper, Alberta, is no longer considered out of control, though Parks Canada says crews are still watching for hotspots. Hundreds of evacuees were allowed to return to the community over the weekend, where 30% of structures were destroyed. New developments tonight setting up 2 possible railway strikes in Canada this week. The union representing thousands of workers at Canadian Pacific Kansas City confirmed tonight it has served a 72-hour strike notice to the railway. Meanwhile, CN Rail says it issued a lockout notice to its unionized workers for Thursday, and the two sides remain very far apart after talks this weekend. A combined 9,300 workers at both rail companies could be off the job Thursday. A cry for justice over the rape and murder of a doctor in India is reverberating tonight. Some doctors remained off the job for a second day, and joining their calls, the victim's family. CTV's Christina Tenalia has the story.
It's the battle cry of women and men in Kolkata. Thousands, including doctors, marching in the streets, chanting, "We want justice! We want justice," after a 31-year-old doctor, a trainee, was murdered August 9th at the hospital where she worked. Her partially clothed and badly injured body was found in a seminar room. "We cannot handle violence or threats to us," says this doctor. "We will not tolerate this." Today, the victim's father spoke to reporters. "I need justice for my daughter," he says. "I hope the culprit who is behind my daughter's rape and murder, she did not die on her own, gets the harshest punishment." The family was first told by hospital management that the woman died by suicide. The head of the hospital has since resigned. "She was aiming for a gold medal in her degree," says the woman's aunt. "This was her dream." The Indian Medical Association announced all non-essential services at hospitals would be shut down for 24 hours, impacting thousands of patients. Activists say the incident emphasizes how Indian women continue to suffer, despite tougher laws in the last decade.
The minimum period of imprisonment is too low.
This expert in South Asian studies says the laws aren't tough enough.
Especially given that usually people are let out before the end of the period for which they're imprisoned.
The prime suspect in the case is a civic volunteer with the Kolkata police. His mother telling reporters, "I should not have given birth to my son. It is a huge mistake." Local media report that India's Supreme Court has taken on the case, a judicial power of the court that allows them to intervene and proceed in cases without a formal complaint being made if the matter is in the public interest. 3 judges will hear the case on Tuesday. Christina Tenalia, CTV News, Toronto.
Ukraine says it scored another strategic victory in its almost 2-week attack on Russian territory. Officials say Ukrainian forces destroyed a second bridge in the Kursk region, disrupting supply lines in the area. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky saying tonight it's also meant to create a buffer zone to prevent further attacks by Russia across the border. Moscow has vowed to respond. The war in Gaza has U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Israel tonight. He's arrived ahead of more ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas. Neither side has accepted a binding proposal from the U.S. last week. However, U.S. officials have expressed optimism about bringing talks to a close this week. On the ground, meanwhile, the Hamas-run health ministry says 19 people were killed in an Israeli airstrike overnight. In Toronto, pro-Palestinian demonstrators blocked streets in front of Union Station today in what they called a downtown shutdown. Protesters expressing support for Palestinians and continuing calls for a ceasefire. They're also calling for a formal arms embargo on Israel. Coming up, toddlers and tantrums because of tablets.
So we were essentially observing is the emergence of a sort of vicious circle.
New warnings on screen time and its impact on your kids' behavior. Plus, the fiery scene on a Ferris wheel in Germany. An Alberta man who hosted the longest-running children's TV show in Canadian history has died. Ron Barge, known as Buckshot, hit the airwaves on CTV Calgary in 1967 and was a fixture for 30 years, along with his sidekick, Benny the Bear. Premier Danielle Smith saying he brought joy, laughter, and countless memories to generations of children and families.
And I remember as a kid every day coming home for school for lunch and watching the show every single day.
His family says Barge died surrounded by family and laughter. He was 87. Those popular children's shows are now often found on tablets in the hands of young children. And while it can be a helpful tool, there's a new warning tonight about the amount of time kids spend on screens. It can lead to more anger and outbursts, a cycle that could be harmful as they struggle to regulate their emotions. CTV's Sarah Plowman has more.
Tablets sometimes play babysitter, entertainer, teacher. New research shows more time with a device could lead to more tantrums.
I do notice that when my kids get too much time with screens, tablets, that they're a little moodier.
Published in JAMA Pediatrics, the study surveyed 315 families in Nova Scotia and tracked the behavior of kids from 3 to 5 years old.
And what we found was that more tablet use at the age of 3 was associated with an increased tendency to show anger and frustration 1 year later.
By age 4, more anger and frustration tended to lead to more tablet time.
So we were essentially observing is the emergence of a sort of vicious circle.
Experts say early childhood is a sensitive time for children to learn to manage their emotions. Screens don't offer that.
And the body of this research is showing is it's not necessarily the screen itself, it's the fact that the kids are not actually playing with other kids.
It's recommended children younger than 2 have no screen time except for video chats with family and friends. And for kids 2 to 5, for it to be limited to 1 hour a day or less. Researchers note some parents pacify their children with screen time. While it could help in the short term, not in the long term, they say.
The use of this strategy can interfere with children's ability to develop internal strategies for regulating their emotions.
Their advice is monitor not just what's on screen, but also how often kids are in front of one. Sarah Plowman, CTV News, Frederickton.
Still ahead, rallying behind a volunteer firefighter.
There's nothing left in Jasper for me now.
Strangers show support to offer a fresh start. There are countless stories of support and resilience coming out of Jasper, Alberta. Tonight, we're sharing one of a volunteer firefighter who lost his home and ended up stuck half a province away. With the help of former colleagues and total strangers, he's set to restart his journey. His faith in humanity restored. CTV's Andrew Johnson reports.
When fire was threatening to overtake the town of Jasper, Terry Lansbury was one of the thousands forced to pack up and go on the run. Now he's one of the hundreds without a home, his devoured by flames.
It was security. Anytime things got too rough in the world, could always go home. And for the first time in my life, I don't have that anymore.
And he's decided his next home will be in BC.
There's nothing left in Jasper for me now. I've managed to get a spot in Parksville on Vancouver Island that I can go to. At a RV site there, reach out and say, we can help you. We've got a spot for you.
The problem? Getting there. His truck died after evacuating stranding Lansbury in Kamloops, awaiting very costly repairs.
Turns out the old Gigi truck that I bought to pull this trailer was a real lemon and, needs around $20,000 in repairs, which is more than the thing's worth.
Lansbury's destination is Vancouver Island, where he was once a volunteer firefighter, and now his former team is trying to make it happen through their own sizable donation and a GoFundMe campaign.
We're really feeling for him and hoping that he can stitch everything back together and come out with some form of a decent life when this is over.
It's the most amazing team. It's like family.
Thousands of dollars have now been raised to get Lansbury's truck back on the road so he can get on with his life.
The compassion of people that have been helping is just, it's been overwhelming. It's a different feeling being on the other end of the spectrum and needing the help.
A well-deserved twist for a dedicated volunteer dealt a tough hand. Andrew Johnson, CTV News, Vancouver.
Remarkable video out of eastern Russia, where one of the country's most active volcanoes erupted today following a major earthquake. Plumes of ash were sent almost 5 kilometers into the sky after the magnitude 7 quake. No major damage was reported. Scientists are warning another stronger quake could follow. At least 23 people were injured when a fire broke out on a Ferris wheel at a music festival in Germany. It's not clear what sparked the fire, which local news agencies said started in one gondola and spread to another. After the break, revisiting Woodstock. We look back with the Shutterbug who captured history. We're going back to Woodstock tonight, 55 years after hundreds of thousands of people gathered for an outdoor concert that defined a generation. The photographer hired to capture the moments shares his experience and memories, giving our Paul Hollingsworth a look behind his lens.
In August 1969, photographer Henry Diltz was on the phone with a friend who was organizing an outdoor concert.
And he said, "You should be out here at this big music festival."
Diltz was soon on his way to cover a massive outdoor counterculture event on a farm near Woodstock, New York.
It was a huge concert, and it was mainly about the music.
From August 15th to 18th, 32 acts performed, some of the biggest names in music from that era. Music historian Alan Cross says without the tumultuous 1960s, Woodstock would never have happened.
We had the Vietnam War, terribly unpopular. We had Richard Nixon, terribly unpopular.
55 years later, the upcoming U.S. election and ongoing Ukraine war have Diltz convinced 2024 is just as divisive as 1969.
It's much better to unite and inspire than it is to divide and incite.
Beyond the music, Woodstock was also defined by the people who showed up.
We had these idealistic hippies that were looking to extend the Summer of Love, which began in 1967, through to at least the end of the decade.
Woodstock was billed as 3 days of peace, love, and music. With modest expectations, organizers expected a crowd of roughly 50,000 to show up.
But 450,000 showed up.
Those who attended endured harsh conditions.
It was rainy, it was muddy, there were no facilities.
Diltz says he's proud of the pictures he took. Even prouder, he participated in a moving experience.
It was a form of uniting everybody at the end. We're all one.
Almost 500,000 people came together for a moment etched in human history, captured through the lens of Henry Diltz. Paul Hollingsworth, CTV News, Halifax.
That is our newscast for this Sunday evening. I'm Heather Butts. Thank you for watching. Good night. And I'll see you again tomorrow on our early edition of CTV National News at 5:30. Good night.